get my microphone on. Good afternoon. There we are. Yes, say order. Oh, that's someone else. That's it. Yes, exactly. Good afternoon. Welcome back to our chamber session. I hope the workshops went well and you had a chance to meet and put some questions and take part in an interesting discussion. We've now got another opportunity for you to participate in the political process, and in particular to put your questions or make some points to representatives from all the main political parties. I'm delighted we've got a stellar cast lined up before you, so I'm going to ask my four colleagues to join me out here. We have from the government Kate Forbes, MSP, who's the Minister for Public Finance and Digital Economy, and the Economy or Finance spokespeople for all the major parties, Murdo Fraser, Rhoda Grant and Liam MacArthur. So, I'm seeing all the major parties. Of course, I've just realised we're missing a Green Party spokesperson, so apologies. We're in an election period, so I definitely want to make that apology there. This is very much a participative session, so it's over to you to put some questions. We've not asked the members to start off with a pitch or anything like that. We're just going to go straight in. If nobody's got any questions, it's going to have to be me to ask a tricky one to start with. But no one's got their hands up yet. Oh, yeah, there we are. David Lonsdale, look at that. Reliable to the end, David.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Obviously, the theme of the conference is very much about change. It's been a pretty tumultuous year for the industry that I represent, retail. We've obviously seen a number of both Scottish and UK household brands stumble and tumble this year. Retail sales have been somewhat becalmed. Costs have been very much to the fore. The industry is obviously trying to respond positively to all of that change. But I'm just conscious we've got both, once we get the election you've just mentioned out of the way, we'll presumably have both a UK government budget and also a Scottish government budget. And I just wondered whether the panel had any thoughts about how those budgets might assist the retail industry through this period of change.
Thanks very much, David. Very pertinent in the week that Mothercare closes, and I think we're all aware of the state of our high streets. So I think I'm not going to put every question to every panellist, because I think that doesn't make for a good discussion. But in this case, I'm going to start off that way. So I wonder, Kate, can I start with you as the government spokesperson?
Yes, absolutely. And I should say, because a joke was made earlier, that I'm not in party colours for the occasion. It just so happened to be what I put on. But I think David makes a great point, and it's certainly the theme that we are hearing consistently from the business community more generally, and it's becoming even more urgent in light of a number of companies in distress. In terms of the budget process, it's a moving position just now in terms of where we're at. Usually the Scottish Government needs about 10 weeks from the UK government budget so that the Scottish Fiscal Commission, who are independent of government but set the forecast within which we can set our budgets so that they can set their forecasts. Our budget was going to be on the 12th of December, and now you know what else is happening on the 12th of December, so we're unlikely to have a UK government budget any time before the 12th of December, potentially not before Christmas. So if you then work backwards, we're pushing up against very late winter, early spring, and then you've got local authorities that need to set their budgets as well. So in light of all that uncertainty, I suppose there's a clear task for all of us as representatives of different parties to work very closely together, particularly in light of the fact that the Scottish Government is a minority government, so we'll always need somebody to work with to get a budget through, and in light of the time constraints, there's even more of an imperative to work together to communicate well with industry. The last point I wanted to make was on taxation, because in the run-up initially to the first time that the Scottish Government could set rates and bands for income tax, we did a big consultation process, engagement process, and one of the themes that came through were certainty, the need for certainty for businesses when it comes to taxation. That's something that we took through the last budget when it came to income tax in particular and non-domestic rates. We'll always have disagreement and dispute around where the rates and the thresholds should be set, but certainly one of our red lines in last year's budget was the need for certainty on income tax and non-domestic rates.
Thank you, Kate. Murdo, could I pass to you?
Yes. Well, first of all, of course, we're not going to get a budget before Christmas, I don't expect. And all parties were calling for an early election or voting for an early election. So I suppose we're all equally to blame for that fact. We're not going to get an early budget. I think the one thing we think is quite likely coming out of whatever budget will be set at a UK level post the election is, I think there's probably going to be more money, because both the main parties, Conservatives and Labour, are talking about spending more cash in what would be the devolved areas. And in terms of the Barnett consequential, that means the Scottish Government will probably get more money through the block grant that comes to Scotland. So there should be a bit more cash to play with. Specifically for the retail sector, I think there has been an issue historically around the level of business rates. And when you see the shift there's been in retail towards online retail, I think it's quite clear there isn't really a level playing field between the traditional high street retailer who's got to maintain premises in which they pay quite large business rates. There's a large business supplement in Scotland that's set at twice the rate that's payable south of the border. So there's a competitive disadvantage there. And online retailers don't face those same burdens. So I think something we need to do, looking at the whole rates regime going forward, is consider whether the business rates structure we have at the moment is fair to retail, given the changing nature of that sector of the economy. And I certainly would be urging the Scottish Government, when they prepare their budget, to take specific action to tackle that question of the large business supplement, which does put Scottish retail at a competitive disadvantage.
Thank you, Bardo. And Rhoda, pass to you.
Retail has changed hugely in the last years, and we were actually talking about, well, this morning we heard about the changes in technology and how quickly that's happening. And retail was always on the high street. It was where people went, spent their money, and now it's much easier. You can be walking down the street on your phone and you can be buying things on your way home. So that has changed. We need to think about how, though, that we keep our high streets, because I think our high streets are not only important to retail, I think they're very important to our social well-being, places to go, what we need to see there, and I suppose making sure that people enjoy that experience as well. And we've seen government funding going into things like, you know, the big online retailers getting grants to come and base themselves here in Scotland. I think we also need to think about how we then encourage our Indigenous business, those that are based in the high street, how we make that high street more attractive. And I'm not saying we give retailers a load of money, but how can we use similar amounts of investment to actually help out our Indigenous retailers? Because if everything goes online, and we need to help them get online as well, because you can't buck that trend, but how do we allow them to do that, stay where they are, and encourage people to enjoy that experience of shopping? And
this won't happen every time you get the misfortune of going fourth in a list of four speakers, Liam, for the Liberal Democrats.
Thanks very much. If I look at it at a local level, the challenge for the High Street is one that I think I see very evidently in Kirkwall and Stromness, in my own Orkney constituency, and it's a kind of microcosm, I think, of what we're seeing nationwide. And I think there have been examples where town centres have managed to rise to that challenge by doing a range of things creatively and differently. And therefore, I think probably working alongside yourself, David, and colleagues, identifying ways in which you provide the incentives not to lock retailers into doing what they've been doing traditionally, but anticipating where they need to be over the next 5, 10, 15 years and more, being agents of their own change. I think the point Murdo also made in relation to rates, I think is a good one, is we're seeing that shift from the high street and onto online. I think the way in which we've been taxing high street retailers or retailers generally, it feels like it's no longer fit for purpose. I think as we go down that process of change, though, what we absolutely need to see is an avoidance of the kind of cliff edge that we've seen with previous non-domestic rate revaluations, where the changes are instituted in a oneer rather than tapered in. Yes, it means that those who benefit from those revaluations wait a little longer in order to enjoy the full benefit. But it means that those who have been good-going businesses operating entirely in accordance with prudence and best principles suddenly find themselves faced with non-domestic rate liabilities that are almost a threat to their viability. And I think whatever changes we see going forward, we need to find a way of tapering those changes in for everybody.
Thank you very much, and thank you, David, for kicking us off there. I've got a couple of hands going up already. Just try and catch my eye in between the questions. What will happen is, of course, you'll want to ask a question just as we finish the session, so get in early. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Ian Smith from Diageo. I also sit in the Scotland Food and Drink Tourism Strategy Delivery Board, and it's more from that point of view that I want to kind of follow on actually from David's point and look at one of the kind of opportunities that's emerging through changing, consumer behaviour. We actually globally we're seeing, consumer spending on experiences is growing at 4 times the rate of spending on stuff, on goods. And I think that creates an amazing opportunity for Scotland in the tourism space, and particularly around food and drink. Obviously, Scotch whisky sector is well known for, we're investing in growing Scotch whisky tourism, but also across the food sector. I think we've got an amazing opportunity to bring people and give them amazing, unique experiences. But with that comes a challenge around rural, connectivity and infrastructure. All 4 of the panel are from, represent rural areas, and I'd like to know their thoughts on how we're tackling those infrastructure challenges to bring economic benefit to rural communities.
I'm not going to put it to the whole panel, but I'll start with you, Murdo. I noticed that the Prime Minister was up launching the campaign at a whisky distillery in Murray. Is that right?
Very, very popular product, as Ian will know. And I think just to follow up, Ian's point, I think if ever you wanted, an illustration of changes in retail and the marketplace, is the fact that the old Fraser store on Princess Street has been taken over by Diageo, and it's become the Johnny Walker experience. So a tourist visitor experience attraction has been created in what was a flagship retail store. And that just kind of illustrates some of the points I think Rhoda was making and Liam were making about the changing nature of the high street, that traditional retail is disappearing in some places, but we're replacing it with alternatives, in this case, the visitor experience. I think specifically on the question of the rural economy, I think the question of connectivity is absolutely central to this. And in particular, I think the need for superfast broadband across Scotland is absolutely crucial. And I've got, as every MSP who represents a rural area will have, numerous examples in my mailbag and at surgeries from people coming forward, small businesses coming forward, complaining about the speed of broadband. Now, a lot of work's going into this with BT Openreach, who are investing in this. The Scottish Government have got their R100 programme, which is aiming to give superfast broadband to every household by 2021, although there have been some delays in that. But I think it's essential we keep on top of that, because the way we reinvigorate the rural economy is ensuring people can get the same services and access no matter where they live in Scotland, so we're not having to worry about people having to commute into towns and city centres, particularly when we're concerned about the climate change agenda.
And Liam, coming from an island, there are even more specific challenges around communities such as Orkney when it comes to attracting tourists and others.
There are, but I would have to say that tourism is one of those shining examples that over a period of quite serious economic problems, we've seen a growth and a sustained growth. We need to make sure it's a sustainable growth, but actually it's a success story that we can be very proud of. I mean, not only in an Orkney context, if I look over the Pentland Firth, the North Coast 500 has been a roaring success, but is now bringing with it its challenges in terms of capacity. But those are the sorts of problems you want to see. You need to find ways of resolving them. But I think there are communities in other parts of the country and other parts of the UK who give their eye teeth to have those sorts of problems to wrestle with. I think Murdo's absolutely right, though. In terms of infrastructure, we've long thought about physical infrastructure, but the digital infrastructure is now key. I think the experiential approach to tourism is key, and people want to share that experience in real time. They don't want to go back. I mean, gone are the days where you would come back home, you'd send your roll of film off to Boots, get it back 2 weeks later, and then share it around your immediate family. Now you're sharing it in real time, and so it's not just even about fixed broadband. It's about mobile connectivity, the 4G, the 5G coverage that we need to see across the country. I will argue for an outside to in approach, incentivising that investment, I think in ways that don't mean that communities like mine are left at the back of the queue every time there's a kind of technology iteration. But I think linking the tourism experience with what we're able to offer by way of food and drink in terms of our jewellery sector, our arts and crafts and all the rest of it, dovetailing those all in together, even the likes of marine renewables where Orkney's at the centre of what's happening, they very much see themselves playing a part of telling a story about what Orkney has to offer, the festivals, etc. Linking all of those sectors up. But I think tourism is one of those areas where we really have cracked it so far, but need to find a way of making sure it's sustainable and accessible in the way that people want to experience it going forward.
Thanks. Yeah. I thought Robin Watson made a very pertinent point. It was a throwaway remark, but it was quite funny when he said we've got all the infrastructure just for the last century. So, gentlemen, just there. Thanks.
Presiding Officer. My name's Alistair Ross. I'm from the Association of British Insurers. I'm just interested to hear from the panel how competitive they think Scotland is as a business location right now. The First Minister spoke earlier about the importance of striking the balance between sustainable growth and fairness. We're sitting in a parliament which is legislating and changing the business environment that we're all trading in. You've already touched on personal and business taxation, and there's a Brexit factor as well. But you're the legislators. How competitive do you think Scotland is right now?
Rhoda, I wonder if I could put that to you first of all. Do you think we're a competitive country?
I think it is competitive. I think there are issues, and I think the issues are more about looking forward and having a degree of reassurance. And I talk about the Constitution in that. We've got Brexit, we've got NDREF 2 coming up, and I think that creates a degree of uncertainty about what the future holds for people. So that, I think, does put us to a disadvantage, so I think we need to deal with that. But I think we have a lot that is good. I think we have a good workforce. We need to continue training, and that's one of the issues, the question before about broadband and the skills that are required. We need to make sure that the workforce keeps up with those skills, because at some point in the future, you are going to have digital skills regardless of what you do. Even just getting out of your house in the morning, you're going to need digital skills, and we fall behind that. So I think we have a lot to offer, but complacency should never be something we embrace. We really need to make sure the skills are there, that we provide the certainty for business so that they can invest. And just going back, if I may, to the last question on broadband, there are real opportunities with that, because people and business, are used to being located in the cities where it's expensive. If we get broadband, good quality broadband out into rural areas, a lot of those jobs can move, and then you've got a highly skilled workforce who want to be there, who are not going to move off. So you've got the certainty of doing that, and I know companies, I think BT was mentioned, but BT do that to an extent as well. But and for retail and the like, you can be based anywhere because you can sell. And so I think there are huge opportunities. We need to go faster with getting those new technologies out, but I think once we have them, we have the workforce and the capability to maximise.
Kate, do you want to again?
Well, I was going to say yes, but, and the yes is that if you look at Scotland, you'd look at the number of universities we have, high world-leading universities we've got. If you look at the business startup rate, Edinburgh, the best place for a startup in the UK. If you look at the growth industries, whether it's tourism, food and drink, renewables, altogether as a package, Scotland is incredibly competitive. And I think one of the things that helps is that we are small enough that actually we can do business. I hope that our government and our parliament are as accessible as possible. We can get everybody around the table quickly to make things happen. But the biggest challenge facing us right now, I would argue, is around demographics, around being able to have the right skills, the right people here in Scotland. Part of that is through training, yes, but a lot of that's to do with the fact that at the moment a lot of our growth in population is driven entirely by immigration, and we need to make sure that we continue to be an attractive place for people to come to if we're going to remain competitive. And I think all of us have a job in that, business community and politicians, to market Scotland internationally as an attractive place to come and to work and to do business.
Got a few other hands going up here. Yes, Essence of Harris, I believe, is the...
Jamie McGowan here. Touching on what you were saying about the rural communities and the Outer Hebrides, my own experience is we're scaling our companies quickly. We own 3 different companies, but it's housing that's the real pain point for us. We are having to outsource parts of our different businesses to mainland companies and work with others, whereas we could be creating amazing jobs and opportunities for people in a rural location, but we have nowhere to put the people. The government have had, the HHP housing have had 25 million for 3 years. They're going to end up losing that or not spending it all. So we need the businesses to work with the local governments to see where these houses are needed. And I just want to know how you can help us to do that, because if we are putting our efforts into growing and scaling companies and passionate about what we do every day to create these opportunities, we need the support of being able to bring the skills to the island, to then have our graduate or apprenticeship schemes where it upskills everybody and stops the migration of the brain drain that we're getting from all the islands. So just if you could comment on that, accommodation is key before we even get to connectivity. If we can't house our people, how do we grow?
Indeed. Liam, can I bring you in first on this? Another element.
Very much recognise the situation. It will be different in Orkney than it is from the Western Isles, but the impact's the same. Whether it's in terms of employers trying to secure housing for employees, whether it's in Orkney a situation where you've got Heriot Watt, who have a campus in Stromness, which is state-of-the-art. It's the centre of marine renewables, but actually housing the students who are coming from all over the world is a real issue. I think what we have seen, and credit to the government, they brought forward an island housing fund that myself and my former colleague from Shetland, Tavish Scott, were very keen in pursuing the government for, and they delivered. It hasn't yet, though, delivered in terms of the spending. And I think part of the problem is that the obstacles you face in terms of taking forward housing projects in islands are different from those on the mainland. The unit costs of housing on the mainland of Orkney, for example, would be 30% higher than those in mainland Scotland. And once you get into the Outer Isles, it's another 30–40% higher still. So I think taking an approach that is properly island-proof to make sure that the investment that's going in can be used in ways that fit the local circumstances is absolutely crucial, because otherwise you can launch all these funds that you like, but the money just will not be drawn down if you're applying criteria that maybe make sense if you're in Inverness, but certainly don't make sense if you're in Stornoway or Kirkwall or Stromness or Lerwick.
To grow your business, or you want other stuff to do your business, you need to show a projection of what you're doing for the next few years. So why is the government and HHP, etc., not doing that with local businesses about the properties? That's the key element, you know, to help them know, yeah, you're creating this, but we need the people to help take you there, you know.
Kate, I know I was up in Skye, in your constituency recently, and housing was absolutely top of the agenda there.
Housing far and away is the top of my mailbox without a shadow of a doubt. There's unique challenges in the Western Isles because of the nature of the land, as you will know, in terms of it being sort of common grazing and crofting land, which adds another element of challenge. But housing is the major challenge. In terms of our projections, our target is 50,000 affordable homes by the end of this Parliament, and at the moment that's on track. And as you say, there's 25 million specifically for rural housing. I would argue that one of the challenges is making sure we've got the right nature of tenure. So particularly in our rural areas, it's not going to be enough to just provide sums of money, although there is additional money for infrastructure development that's required in harder to reach areas. It's not sufficient just to provide the money. We've got to have that mixed tenure. So in rural areas, things like the self-build loan fund, where you've got a crofter with a bit of land that can build his own home, making sure that government policy can be adaptable to the different communities that we're trying to serve, I think in all of this is key. So there is a target, the money needs to be unlocked to be able to deliver that, and there's no point in talking about marketing Scotland unless we have the homes available. The last brief point I would make is, I think it takes a mixture of tax, regulation and building to solve this problem. So with the increase in tourism comes the challenge with short-term lets and second homes. So we've committed to taking forward regulation on short-term lets. And secondly, there's an additional dwelling supplement on the purchase of a second home, which, you know, not everybody likes, but it's trying to tackle that problem to make sure that homes are not sitting vacant for 51 weeks a year and not occupied. And then with that comes the funding that's in place. Some of the most significant sums of money going into infrastructure, going into housing, and there's that 3-year term as well for that funding. It's not just on a yearly basis to unlock the housing.
And Liam, you want to back in briefly?
I entirely agree with everything that Kate's just said. I think in relation to the second homes issue, though, even there, the criteria you set for how quickly a house will sell in a rural or island setting needs to, I think, be assessed on the basis of how that market functions, which is very, very different from somewhere like the centre of Edinburgh, where you put it on the market and you've got 20 people banging on your door within an hour. And I don't think we've got that quite right yet. But
Indeed. Some more questions here. Woman just there, yes?
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Rachel Anderson here from RES. So we're the world's largest privately owned renewable company. We've had a lot of discussions today about net zero and climate change targets, and it's great to see some businesses in terms of what they're doing in terms of the circular economy and moving that forward. But I think what we can't get away from is the need to increase the deployment of renewables in Scotland, and I think Scotland can be very proud that it's been a world leader in that. But I'd like to know from the panel, what else can we do to ensure that we increase the collaboration between private sector, between public sector, between the agencies and communities that will need to deliver renewables and deliver it at an increased pace than what we've seen before.
Murdo, I wonder if I could put that to you first, just where are we going in this to try and meet our environmental targets?
Sure. I mean, I don't know if you were in the workshop to do with the Scottish National Investment Bank earlier, but I think some of us were involved in that. Rhoda and Kate and I were all there, a number of people were there. And one of the purposes of the Scottish National Investment Bank is to look at where, at the moment, the market is not supporting initiatives that will help in this drive towards net zero carbon by 2045, which is something that is shared right across all the political parties in the Scottish Parliament. So there will be initiatives in that space, whether it's in renewable energy or decarbonisation of transport, for example, which at the moment will struggle to attract the necessary private sector funding, which with a little bit of assistance from the Scottish National Investment Bank, which is using, in effect, public capital to lever in more private sector investment, will be a way of getting some of these projects off the ground. I think there's a lot that governments can do here, but there's also a lot that people need to do themselves, whether that's individuals or as families or indeed private business too. So, for example, government can set a framework. We are seeing a major move in the transport sector towards electric vehicles. Governments can help that by providing the infrastructure of electric vehicle charging points across the country. At the same time, people have to be prepared to make that decision for themselves to shift from using petrol or diesel vehicles to electric vehicles. And that shift in itself will help drive improvements in the technology, where one of the burdens and restrictions at the moment to using electric vehicles is the whole question of range. And I mean, I would love to drive an electric car. I don't. I drive a hybrid because the number of miles I travel every week, I simply wouldn't be able to do the journeys I do with an all-electric vehicle. But I hope that in 5 years' time, when I buy a new car, it will be an all-electric vehicle. So government's got a role to play in terms of creating the infrastructure, but people have to be persuaded that they need to make these changes themselves.
This is, as you will know, we're being pressed to declare, we have declared a climate emergency. So this is not something that we can wait for, yet our first speaker this morning was Robin Watson from the oil and gas industry, saying that, yes, but we have to move carefully if we're going to diversify. So how do we get that balance right?
Yes, we need to get the balance right, and I suppose one of the things that we fight for is a just transition. We don't leave people behind. Now, some of what we've already done has left people behind. If you look at some of the things like domestic renewables, things like photovoltaics, they're like, if you can afford them, that's fine, you can have them. If you can afford to insulate your property, you benefit not only by saving the planet, but you benefit from lower bills. If you can afford to buy an electric car and install a charger, you benefit from that. But at the moment, we are leaving a lot of people behind. And if we, I suppose I've got great faith in innovation because we see what we have already achieved. If you look back, I am pretty sure the innovation will get there. But we need to make sure that when we are innovating, that we don't leave people behind. And those people are the folk that have always been left behind. But it's in all our benefits to make sure everyone keeps up, because while the folk that are being left behind are still emitting more carbon than they should, than they would like to, that affects the planet for all of us. So there has to be a bit of balance. And yes, early adapters and people who can afford to do that, fine. But we need to make sure that those technologies are available. And that's something, while we invest in things like housing, we have to invest in retrofitting renewables, retrofitting insulation to those that can't afford it, as well as helping people build new houses. And that's an issue certainly in places like the Western Isles, where we've got old drafty croft houses and people living in fuel poverty. That needs to change, not just for those people's living experience, but for the rest of us who have to live with climate change. So, I think we can do it. I'm sure we can do it. We just have to find the right way of doing it.
Indeed. Another question just here.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm Colin Smith, Chief Executive at the Scottish Wholesale Association. We are the wheels to Scotland's food and drink industry. I sit on the Implementation Advisory Group for the Scottish Government's Deposit Return Scheme. We spend a lot of time engaging across industry, indeed with Diageo and even with the Scottish Retail Consortium, on how we can best implement the Scottish Government's design of DRS. And it's just struck me today that everyone, ourselves and across industry, support the leadership of Scottish Government in creating a circular economy, their ambition to have their net zero ambition for 2040. And DRS is part of helping achieve that goal. Slight concern that we heard Robin speak about generational technological jumps, and there is technology out there that could enhance the deposit return scheme and allow a greater capture rate of the cans, bottles and aluminium that we're looking to achieve. And I just wonder that while industry has been asked to make tough decisions, that actually the government take this tough decision of looking at the technology that is around the corner but is not quite ready for the implementation date of 2021. And we are about to implement a scheme that is 40 years old, as opposed to looking to the future and actually being ambitious and striving to take that generational technological jump. I just wonder what the panel think of that.
Thanks so much. So, Kate, this is very much, the First Minister actually mentioned the DRS scheme this morning in her speech and talking about difficult decisions, but I think we've heard a lot, in fact, that it's ongoing at the moment, how we make it work. There's a nostalgic appeal to, the old days where we took our lemonade bottles back to the corner shop, but the practical difficulties for retailers and for the glass industry are there to see. How are the government going to...
So nostalgic, I don't think I remember it. But anyway...
Youngster.
I was the way you stepped that on.
3 quick points in response to that, because I hear what you're saying in terms of these decisions are not easy. So I represent a lot of, for example, small convenience stores that are grappling with issues of space and the impact, and particularly in rural areas, the issues of transport. So I understand, and I think the point that the First Minister made this morning, and I was involved with the decision around ensuring that there was a relief on rates for a deposit return scheme, that we need to be, as a government, responsive to the concerns that are raised to make sure that, as far as possible, we're implementing this together. And where there are policies that need to be tweaked or changed or adapted to help with the implementation and the rollout of the scheme, then we take those decisions quickly and we take them early as possible. I think my second point would be that deposit return scheme is serving two purposes. On one hand, it's doing exactly what it's intending to do, which is to support the circular economy and to ensure that we are recycling as much as possible. And the levels of waste that continue in this country are phenomenal, particularly the levels of plastic waste that end up in our seas and on our beaches, and is quite catastrophic, and it needs to be dealt with. And we've got targets in terms of reducing landfill, for example. So if you're reducing landfill, then it needs to have somewhere to go, and that's why deposit return scheme is important. But the third point I was going to make is that there's an element in which it's symbolic too. I mean, this is my final mild point, but there's an element in which we have a job here together to promote and raise awareness of the need to recycle and the need to support the circular economy. And I think, to the point around nostalgia, this is not why it's been implemented, but it helps to educate and raise awareness, particularly amongst the next generation, of the need that bottle or whatever it is, that product, can be recycled, and it is recycled at your curb, but there's also a need to ensure that we are reusing and recycling as much as possible. And the way in which curbside recycling over the last few years has changed behaviours is incredible, to the extent where you feel guilty and bad, a very bad person, for not recycling a product. And that sort of culture change, I think, would go hand in hand with a deposit return scheme.
Can I just make a comment? The technological advancements would allow technology to be used in the curbside system, so we're not actually asking the consumer to change their current habit.
Okay. Yeah.
Murdo, I can see you're animated, want to get in there.
Yeah, I mean, this is an issue which, I've had a lot of representation from people in the retail sector, people in the food and drink sector, and the glass and packaging sector about. And, the first thing to say is, everybody accepts the principle of a deposit return scheme. It's a good idea, right? Encouraging the behaviour change that Kate's just been talking about. I think the concern is around the design of the scheme that is currently being proposed. In particular, two elements. First of all, having aluminium and plastic being recycled makes a lot of sense. There's a big question mark whether also having glass as part of the scheme makes sense, because we already have curbside glass recycling in a lot of parts of Scotland, and bringing glass with its weight, with the difficulty in managing it, adds an extra level of complication, which risks the benefits that would come from a system built around plastic and aluminium. But the other element in all this is that given that the UK government has indicated it wants to bring in a deposit return scheme UK-wide, what is the merit in having a different Scottish system? Because if you're involved in packaging, if you're involved in distribution of bottled products, whether that's spirits or alcohol or soft drinks or whatever, that means for the manufacturers, you've got to produce a different Scottish product from the product you're producing to sell elsewhere in the UK, which adds a huge complication to the supply chain. And I understand the Scottish Government want to see something branded distinctively Scottish, but actually it would make much more sense to have one unified UK-wide system that would avoid these extra costs in the supply chain. And I think it might be better if we just, rather than rushing ahead with a distinctively Scottish scheme by 2021, just for the sake of it, if we all took a step back and say, let's just take a pause here, let's see if we can work with the rest of the UK in building a system that actually takes the benefit of this new technology that's emerging, reading microchips in your bin, for example, that they can then reward you directly through an app, rather than a system that might, in 5 years' time, look very out of date.
I'm slightly worried, Murdo, that you want to monitor our bins, but there we are. Hello. Gentleman just there, yes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My name is Colin Taylor. The company is Neat Living. We're involved with energy-efficient homes. So at the risk of acting as a dating agency, I would very much like the opportunity to speak with anybody who's looking for energy efficient homes, because I think we would have a solution that would be perfect for the Outer Isles and other remote locations.
That's very good. It's like love across the chamber. It's to be encouraged, I assure you. Yes, I know. Any other final points? Yes, the gentleman right at the back there.
The Gupta Smart Energy. I'd like to pick up a point which we covered in the workshop and picks up something that Murdo said, and it's about decarbonisation of transport. This goes right across all modes of transport, but let's take aviation, because there's a fantastic opportunity for Scotland here. Aviation is about to change dramatically with hybrid aircraft using either hydrogen fuel cells or batteries. And with our fragile outer island communities, we can use these aircraft next year, and that's being done in Norway. But there's a problem, and that problem is quite deep, and that is the infrastructure, let's say, to support Glasgow Airport's increased decarbonisation airside doesn't exist, and the hydrogen refuelling doesn't exist. What can the government, working together with the private sector, do to enhance the speed at which we can make that transition?
Well, Murdo talked earlier about his range anxiety about a car. Goodness knows his range anxiety in an airplane going to America or something like that. Liam, I wonder if I could bring you in first. You're a regular flyer from Orkney, clearly. And
I think I probably have the largest carbon footprint of any MSP, and I think the challenge that's thrown down to all of us is what can you do about it, rather than just shrug your shoulders and write it off. And I think what we heard in the most recent programme for government were ambitions about having carbon neutral aviation within the Highlands and Islands. I think for the reasons that you suggest, it is a logical place probably to start with those sorts of initiatives, not least because of the range anxiety that Murdo and many others have. It's one thing in a car, but even if you're hopping over from West Street to Papa West Street, you want to know that it's going to make that 2-minute journey and not plummet into the sea. But the technology's there. I think you've put your finger absolutely on it. The kind of hidden stuff, the non-sexy stuff, the stuff that's less attractive for ministers to come up and cut ribbons on and whatnot, absolutely needs to be right. Otherwise, we're setting this up to fail. But I think the aspiration's there within government. I think the technology's there within industry. It's then about the time frame you're looking to apply this in. And back to the earlier point about DRS, everybody's signed up to it. But let's not get hung up on a date that allows us to say we're doing it faster than anybody else. Let's make sure that it's in place in a way that's going to be sustainable. It's going to meet the needs, frankly, of those who rely on these services as lifeline services, but also goes some way to meeting our climate change ambitions at the same time.
I think we've had a couple of points there about partnership working between private sector and government, which is important to remember. But so one last point from the floor here. Yes, gentlemen.
Officer, Ewan MacDonald-Russell from the SRC. A very short question for everyone. We're in a period of sluggish economic growth in Scotland. What single fiscal measure do you think is the best thing we can do to help drive a bit more growth and bounce Scotland's economy up a little bit?
Nice concluding question. You know, one single fiscal measure. But anyway, it gives me a chance to allow all the panellists perhaps to have a final thought before we close the particular session. And Rhoda, I could ask you to go first.
I think it's important that we put money in people's pockets. So having a living wage will mean that people will spend. If you give money to people who already are stashing their surplus in a bank account, they're not going to spend anymore. If you give money to people who are really struggling, they will spend it because they are already doing without. So I think if we're going to really get the economy going and get people back spending, we need to give them the wherewithal to do that.
Excellent. Liam, do you have a thought from the Liberal Democrats?
I mean, at the risk of lowering the tone, I would dodge the question by saying that the most impactful decision we could take would be to stop Brexit. I think in terms of the taxation system we have, there are limits to what we are able to do here. But I think at a local level, There is much more we can do to empower local authorities to take control over taxation decisions that can better flex to meet the needs of the different communities that they are there to serve. I think what we've seen over the period of devolution, unfortunately, is not the empowering, the devolving of powers down to local authorities. So I would like to see some more radical action in relation to empowering local authorities, because they are invariably better placed to make decisions that are more attuned to the needs of the communities they serve.
Can I say, can I admire the seamless way you got in your key election message into the answer to this? Murdo.
Well, on that note, ruling out a second independence referendum would be my biggest ask. But I think in terms of fiscal measures, I think a competitive tax regime in Scotland is important. I think there is a risk if you create a perception that Scotland is the highest tax part of the United Kingdom, that then deters investment and deters talented people coming to Scotland. So I think we need to be very careful when we're setting our income tax rates that we're not creating too large a tax differential with the rest of the UK.
And Kate, as the Scottish Government for Finance, the last word.
I would incentivise in significant investment in our digital capabilities as a business community, because I think that's where the greatest wins on productivity are to be made. And if we're to see economic growth, it's going to be driven by productivity, not by population over the course of the coming years.
Excellent. 4 very practical and sensible answers which will be wrestled with by this Parliament. And thank you very much indeed for the questions, for the points you put. Can I ask you to join me in thanking our panel for their contributions this afternoon? Thank you very much. And I'm now going to ask, if I can, our Scottish Government Minister, Ivan McKee, Minister for Trade and Innovation, Trade Investment and Innovation, to make some concluding remarks and bring our conference to a close. Ivan.
Great, thank you, Ken, and thanks to everybody for coming along today to the annual Business in the Parliament conference. And it's you don't know how much of a treat it is to stand on this side of the chamber rather than over there facing this way. So it's great to all see you face to face. Conference focused on leadership, which is hugely important, an important role that business leaders can play in shaping Scotland's future. And I particularly want to thank Robin Watson for opening the conference, and Robin talked about the mega trends that we face. And I want to follow on from that to recognise that Scotland has some great opportunities to lead the world, and I want to work with you for us to together grasp and realise those opportunities. And Scotland's ideally placed to take advantage of the changes that are gathering pace in the global economy, and to be, as the First Minister has said, the inventors and producers of innovations that create the future and not just their consumers. To be in the vanguard of action that tackles climate change and then use that technological advantage to open up and succeed in new global markets. And looking around the room today, I'm heartened to see Scottish businesses that are leading the way. And as I said, it was particularly great to hear from Robin earlier on, who I visited earlier this week in Aberdeen to have a chat about the great work that Wood are doing, and it allowed Robin to try out some of the lines he was going to use in his speech and get some feedback on whether they worked or not, and they were excellent, let me tell you. And Robin spoke about leadership in the sense of curiosity that drove him through his career, the courage and tenacity and taking the long view and the vision, and this thirst to continually realise that wherever you are, you can always do better. And I completely agree with that. And I think in addition to that, leading by example is hugely important, and taking complex challenges and being able to articulate and communicate those clearly is a very important part of leadership, and giving a space and structure to the team to be able to move things forward. Things I've learned in my business career before coming into politics, but are hugely relevant to the work of vision, the work that government does, and having that vision. And I think hugely important is also the ability to move on to new challenges, new technologies, new opportunities before, and re-engineering the business before you absolutely have to. Something that Wood Group are clearly grasping, and something that I think Scotland is in a great place to be able to seize and do and move forward. And I think that's something we've clearly articulated through our grasping of the climate challenge and the opportunities as well as the challenges that presents. And the Scottish Government's National Performance Framework sets out our purpose to focus on creating a more successful country with opportunities for all of Scotland to flourish through increased well-being and sustainable and inclusive economic growth. And the government's leadership role is set firmly in the context of that purpose, delivering on our national outcomes and inspiring and supporting others to do so too. And Scotland's economic strategy, which was published in 2015, sets a framework for actions which reflect the dynamic nature of the economy. We launched an economic action plan last year to demonstrate the actions we are taking to build a strong, vibrant and diverse economy that promotes well-being and attracts investment. It puts Scotland at the forefront of transitioning to a carbon-neutral, circular and innovative economy, and we are in the process of refreshing that plan to make sure it stays relevant and meets the needs of businesses and communities across Scotland. We know what needs to be done. We need to get on and deliver, and we need to do that in partnership with business. And one key piece of work in our economic action plan, of which I am particularly proud, is our Export Growth Plan, A Trading Nation, which was published earlier this year. And it looks to enable more Scottish businesses to export more products and services to global markets. And I co-hosted with my colleague Colin Beattie, MSP, and colleagues from the Scottish Chamber of Commerce, a great workshop on overcoming barriers to export earlier on. And a number of themes came out of that, but there's three in particular I just wanted to touch on. The first was about Scotland's ambition and aspiration. And there were many comments that Scotland needs to do more to be better at selling what we have to offer as a country, and Scotland's businesses to be better to go onto the world stage and promote what they have to sell, because very often I believe that we underplay our great advantages to our detriment. The second one was about cooperation and the concept of Team Scotland, something that we have worked hard to pull together and is accelerating in pace, as was reflected by comments in the workshop, pulling together our agencies with business leaders, with our Global Scot network, with our universities and government holding the ring and supporting that, so that when a business lands in a market, they have a network round about them of people that want to help and can support them to deliver as best they can. And we recognise also in the workshop many challenges that are there, many areas and opportunities for improvement, and that is something that I, as Minister responsible, and government as a whole, will rise to that challenge, pick up those opportunities for improvement and deliver on them. And I meet regularly with exporters across Scotland to understand the challenges and opportunities that they face, so that we can all play our part in increasing exports. And this is so important because companies that trade internationally tend to be more innovative, more productive and more competitive. And exporting helps Scotland's economy to grow and helps the Scottish Government to deliver on our core purpose. Simply, what is good for business is good for everyone. And to back that, the Scottish Government has committed an additional £20 million over 3 years to increase exports as a percentage of GDP. We had to make some choices when we put together our export plan, A Trading Nation, in terms of sector focus, in terms of priority countries, and in terms of what sort of businesses we should support. But that, I think, comes back to leadership. It's about making those hard choices and then delivering on them and bringing the whole ecosystem with you. But we took an evidence-based approach to reach those decisions, how to focus our resources. And that process, I'm sure, is something that resonates with business leaders around the room. But I think it's something that gives us a really strong policy framework and direction to be able to support businesses across Scotland as they seek to export more. And I'm pleased to say that we're taking a similar approach to delivering our investment growth plan to grow foreign direct investment into Scotland. Again, FDI is good for the economy. It helps bring us up to speed with emerging technologies, plugs us into the global talent pool, and helps Scotland's businesses grow and innovate faster. And it's another area where we're looking very much to work in partnership with businesses to develop and to deliver the plan. Over the coming years, our role in supporting growth in the Scottish economy will be shaped further by three key developments: the creation of the Scottish National Investment Bank, our infrastructure mission, and the steps we are taking to tackle climate change through clean growth. There are challenges there for businesses, but there are many opportunities too. And for both, government is committed to support you where we can. And you don't need to tell me that it's business that creates wealth, not the government. But our role is key, and our role is to create the right conditions for you to grow and prosper. And that's what the Economic Action Plan does. And that's why we appreciate all the input from the workshops today. Your views help us to understand what we need to do to continue to support businesses' needs and priorities. And I want to reiterate that the government is unashamedly pro-business and pro-growth, and stress while MSPs from different parties may have different views on many things and how we get there, we all share a strong desire to see Scotland prosper. And I recognise the importance of government, parliament and businesses all working together for common goals, and I see this event as an important, visible demonstration of that partnership. And in closing, I would just like to take a moment to thank everybody who's made this such a valuable and interesting conference, and I want to thank the business organisations involved in the conference, in particular SCDI, Young Enterprise Scotland, Women's Enterprise Scotland and the Scottish Chambers of Commerce, who all led workshops. And it's important to us that the agenda and the workshops are driven by a business perspective. It's not about what government or parliament wants to talk about, it's what businesses want to talk to us about. And like others, I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge that the Parliament is now 20 years old, and Parliament has changed Scotland significantly in that time. And if we think back to 1999, which is not that long ago for somebody of my vintage, but many of you will, it will be a long time ago. Back then, we were worried about the millennium bug. The euro had just been introduced in 11 countries. And Scotland's men's football team, if you remember, had recently come back from a World Cup final, something we haven't experienced since, although other teams have done better. And I don't know what the next 20 years will bring. That will take us to 2039, think about that. But we've heard about the rate and pace of change, the uncertainty of our environment, and to me this reaffirms the importance of working together, business, government and parliament, to deliver inclusive and sustainable economic growth. So thank you very much, and I'd like to hand back now to the presiding officer to close the day's events. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ivan, and thanks for ending us on such a positive note. Some of us will be happy just to be around in 20 years. So can I thank you all very much indeed. In fact, can I ask you to join me in thanking all our speakers, our participants, our officials for looking after us so well this morning. We're going to break now for lunch. It's awaiting you just in the members' room just down there. There'll be a further opportunity to network there, but this is the end of the formal session. I think we'll also be emailing you sheets for you to fill in just to give us suggestions on how the conference went and suggestions for next year. But can I end by saying thank you very much for your contributions, for your participation, and I hope you come back to the Scottish Parliament. Thank you, and I close this meeting.